or even if it's the final plenary session, this does not give it less importance, because I consider that this discussion about the challenges of development in the Arab region, the sustainable development challenges and what policies should be followed, without having a serious searching for different solutions, then we will not be able to achieve anything. And when we talk about the challenges of financing development, we are not talking only about the Arab region, but even generally speaking, financing development generally. So when we do that, we have to first start by talking about the international partnership for development. And here, of course, we need to remind you that this international partnership is one of the main topics that all the declarations have focused on, UN declarations. And those declarations were supported by the member states in order to create this international partnership to help the developing countries in achieving the SDGs, whether at the level of the MDGs or even later on the new generation, the SDGs. Now, practically, in this international partnership, we are talking about three main basic factors, or three main pillars, let us say, or three sources, three different sources for financing within this partnership. The first source would be the official grants or official assistance provided by the industrial countries as a share of their national income to help developing countries with development, as well as the flux of direct investment, thus creating an appropriate and enabling environment for these FDIs in the developing countries. And the third source of financing would be the debts. In the Addis Ababa summit in 2015, where financing development was discussed, of course, the world at the time was facing a set of challenges. First of which, the international global crisis that was taking place, in addition to other international crises, subsequent international crises that decreased the capacity of those industrial countries in providing assistance to the developing countries within the framework of the ODA, in addition to the fact that there was a radical transformation in defining what we mean by development assistance or assistance for development, because it was known that all of these assistances that go into developmental programs in developing countries. And in this definition, it was considered later on that all assistances allocated to efforts for security and stability and some military assistance as well, in addition to humanitarian intervention to help with the refugee crisis and the displaced, as well as some specific assistance for integrating and for absorbing the migrants into the industrial countries. All of these different details were considered as part of the ODA, where there was a new perspective saying that security, weapons, and humanitarian assistance will help stability, which in turn will positively impact the developmental process. And however, the result will be an increase in the ODA according to the new definition, but at the same time, a decrease in the value of assistances or money or funds allocated for developmental assistance. In addition to that, the industrial countries now are unable, or the developing countries, sorry, are unable to assume more debts especially that now we are talking about a third of the budget allocated for servicing public debt in most of the developing countries. In Lebanon, for instance, it's 40%. Consequently, those burdens are already unacceptable, and thus no further debts can be assumed. That is why now there is an orientation towards providing the foreign direct investment, the FDI, a bigger role, and at the same time giving the private sector a bigger responsibility as a developmental partner in this process, in the developmental process as a whole. Consequently, in this session, we are supposed to discuss what are the sources that are supposed to be allocated in order to achieve the SDGs and the goals that we are going to agree on in the framework of challenges facing the Arab region. And it would be of benefit before we start this discussion to talk about something very important. It was already mentioned yesterday in one of the breakout sessions that I consider one of the most important, where we talked about the importance of diversifying the different Arab economies and consequently having an economic diversification per se to participate in facing the challenges. Specifically, knowing that, and that was said by the chair of yesterday's session, especially that there is a decline in natural resources on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is a pressure applied on the natural resources, or a stress on natural resources, consequently affecting the economy. And all of this threatens the sustainability of natural resources and the impacts that will ensue on the one hand. Consequently, on the other hand, this pushes us towards saying that it is necessary to move towards a true economy. Now, some indicators show that the rate of investment in the real economy between 1976 and 2001 is minus 7.1%. Consequently, the growth is a negative 1. However, the growth of natural resources is also minus 2.3%. Consequently, the diversification of the economy and orienting those investments from investing in natural resources towards other investments in other sectors has become an urgent necessity that cannot be postponed. And thus the question, where do we move with these investments? Now, the current position is to reinforce the productive capacities, consequently reinforce and promote the real economy through those productive capacities in the fields of industry as well as other agricultural sectors. And thus there will be a value, an added value where we create job opportunities, especially that we are talking about a high rate of more than 60% of job opportunities, more than 60% in the Arab region in the informal sector, meaning unprotected labor. Thus, this deepens inequality as well as the absence of social justice. So when we talk about a big influx of investments, we are talking about creating an enabling and appropriate environment for these investments, and to do so, and if we do not take into consideration by doing so issues related to human rights, social justice, a balance amongst the different sectors, then this will have negative impacts. What are these criteria that are supposed to be taken into consideration? This is a first question. A second question, the influx of foreign direct investment. Will this be at the expense of the local productive capacities or at the level, at the expense of SMEs? Now, someone in the morning session talked about the middle class and the importance of a middle class vis-a-vis social stability. So are there some procedures in order to have protection of local capacities, taking into consideration the influx of foreign direct investment? And the most dangerous point, finally, is that of the nature of the regime and governance, transparency, as well as the use or the optimal use of all of these capacities, where we do not waste any capacities that we could have used. So no tax evasion, nothing that will be taken at the expense of the limited natural resources. In this panel then, we will talk about all of these things, starting with Mr. Antoine Ahbej, who is in the banking sector. He is in the Arab Federation, the Federation of Arab Banks, and he will talk about the role of Arab banks in this regard. Ms. Kinda Hattar as well, who is the regional advisor of the Arab branch in the Transparency International. And she is supposed to talk to us about the needed governance as well as mechanisms of transparency and accountability vis-a-vis the public sector and the private sector together in order to come up with an optimal use of all the investments, as well as Mr. Anas Al-Hasnawi, who is from the civil society in Morocco. He represents the Arab region in the Administrative Bureau of the Regional Expert on Effectiveness Development Cooperation. So he's a regional expert in this cooperation. And it's a tract he will talk to us about. And Ms. Isabel Kampf from UN Environment. And she will talk to us about international experiences in this regard. We start first by Mr. Anas Al-Hasnawi. Maybe I took more than 7 minutes, but I will not allow anyone to speak for more than 7 minutes. Good morning, everyone. How much do we need in order to finance, or what is, in your opinion, what, give us estimates. What is the value? Any figure, any number? No one knows? Great. Everyone is talking. Everyone is throwing around figures. Everyone knows, no one knows at the same time. And this is the reason behind our worry. Yesterday, the Secretary General said that we have in this region financing for development. So he was in New York when he said that money governs the world and rules the world. And we need 7 trillion annually in order to cover these goals. And the Secretary General of the UN says, and despite all of our needs, money is always the central question. However, there is a real problem in this regard. How do we link this money? How do we link it to, there are obstacles and challenges. For Africa, for example, it is said that the local resources, because 13% of the local resources are more than enough to solve and bridge all the needs until 2030. However, now there is a need in 2 trillion per year, but it is not available. So 1.5 trillion, approximately 2. What are the capacities that we know about? There are the classical known factors, and there are the migrants that we always talk about. But all of this will go to financial institutions. There are also the official assistance that we already talked about that is given by the donor entities, and the value is decreasing continuously, and it remains, or it does not really focus on developmental targets, just like what we heard earlier on. Rather, now those foreign or those international assistances are moving towards the private sector or other forms of assistance. Debts are heavy burdens, and in the Arab region these debts are increasing, and we keep taking debts in order to cover other debts. Now external trade is governed by so many factors, and the FDIs aim at profits or extraction industries, in addition to the fact that they fluctuate. So in times of crisis, no one can depend on all of these sources. So all of this has led to new mechanisms, thinking of new mechanisms And here I say that we need a blended finance as well as natural resources and sustainable debt, in addition to a very dynamic private sector. And the question here to ask is, why today are we going to focus on the private sector in this way, knowing fully well that ever since we have had the structural evaluation or assessment, it was the private sector that benefited more than any other entity. Even the foreign direct investment benefited from the privatization process. And as you know, the flourishing of FDIs was only during that period, during that phase. Anyhow, this blended finance is an effort to provide incentives to share equally the risks, and vis-a-vis the natural resources, the worrying point here is to have a kind of financial guarantee, but at the same time fighting all forms of illicit influxes. As for the private sector, also there's another worry, and that is to take into consideration what is harmonious for the private sector. And when we talk about enabling environment, we have to look at tax incentives. And of course, when we talk about those local resources, we have to take into consideration the taxation system. And here, by that, I mean that what is requested is to manage the taxation system. Anyhow, we are facing an inverted pyramid where all forms of thinking put the human being at the bottom of the pyramid. And this inverted pyramid needs to be re-inverted to stand on its base, looking this way, because the humanitarian causes need to be dealt with by the human being. And in the core of this process, we see this mechanism looking at or having sovereignty over natural resources, as well as the productive economy and democratic ownership. And when we talk about those main components, we need to move towards natural estimates within the framework of a productive economy. We have to have a reformulation of tax returns in a just manner, and through strengthening the private sector in the country, through SMEs, of course, and then getting into production productive chains in order to give priority to national concerns and national issues. However, this does not mean that we need to put aside foreign direct investment. However, according to specific criteria that we are very strict with, in addition to blended finance, as well as other partnerships, PPPs, public-private partnerships. But anyhow, if we look at the private sector, or if we look at the different levels or the whole of these mechanisms, we see that there should be a monitoring mechanism in order to really know what is happening. And we need to integrate human rights criteria, gender integration, as well as making sure that everyone is included. By that, NGOs, CSOs, CSIs, the youth, and all other groups. And as I said, but where we see people, we see alternatives. Here, we are not talking about a multidisciplinary framework, because when we look at that, we see that there are so many aspects that are not being invested. For example, we have migration and development. We have the effectiveness and efficiency of development. For example, everything that is being done, all the capacities, all the international commitments here fall under this title, as well as what we mean by an economy of solidarity, in the midst of which we see cooperation. And of course, we should not forget the green economy. The green economy that is talked about in a different way, different than what was said about that before. So thus we need, when we talk about an economy of solidarity, it means that we need to include all the entities, all the stakeholders, all the groups, whether marginalized or not. And at the end, we also have what we call social protection, or a minimum level of social protection. In other words, groundworks for social protection. And just to give you an example, to say that in the midst of this process, we have the political will. Because if the political will is absent, nothing can be achieved. So there should be political will to have sovereignty over the economic decision. Now, regarding social protection, let me go back and say it's not costly at all. It is not costly, but rather it is the re-employment of all the natural resources or resources available in other ways to cover the main points of social protection. And this thus will really help out if Arab countries apply that, because they don't need to spend to get social protection. I will suffice myself with this, and I hope that these ideas will allow you to ask questions and open the floor for discussion. As I said earlier on, where we see the human being or the individual, we will find alternatives.
شكرا أستاذ أنس. ننتقل فورا إلى
Thank you, Mr. Anas. Now we move to Mr. Atwan Hbeish, who is the Special Advisor for the Secretary General in the Arab Federation of Arab Banks.
Okay, well, I'll start very quickly.
سأبدأ بسرعة، ولكن أريد أن أقول لكم أنه بشكل عام يتوقع من المصرفيين أن يعطوا أرقاما وإحصائيات، ولكن بحسب تجاربي الماضية أحاول أن أتكلم عن إيديولوجيا معينة، أي عملية تواصل تسد هو بين قطاع المصرفي، المنظمات غير الحكومية، وفي نهاية المطاف المواطنين والإنسان بشكل عام. إذن أولا سأتكلم عن الفيل في الغرفة. هل فعلا تهتم المصارف بهذا الموضوع؟ إنه سؤال بسيط ولكنه معقد بطبيعته. عندما نتكلم مثلا عن عمل الصيرف أو العمل المصرفي بشكل منفصل، نعم نحن نهتم لأننا معنيون، ولكن عندما ننظر إلى هذا المنظور من جهة الشركات تكون آراؤنا مختلفة، وأنا هنا لأساعدكم جميعا على هذا الانتقال النوعي. سنتكلم عن التغير المناخي مثلا، التغير المناخي. بالنسبة لمصارف منطقة المينا نحن لا نهتم كثيرا لذلك. لماذا؟ لأنه المخاطر بالنسبة إلينا وبحسب مؤشر التغير المناخي في المنطقة العربية هي مخاطر متدنية جدا، فلذلك نحن لا نهتم. هذه نظرتنا إلى هذا الكوب. بعض الأشخاص ينظرون إلى الكوب ويقولون أن الكوب مليء أو فارغ. نحن ننظر إلى الربح والخسارة. حتى الكوب هنالك مخاطر عندما ننظر إلى الكوب. حتى الآن ينظر الجميع إلى الاقتصاد الكلي والتغير المناخي أو أي مسؤولية خاصة بالشركات كعائق معين. وعندما نتكلم مثلا عن البيئة، فبعض الأشخاص لا يعرفون كيفية إدخال الأرقام في جداول معينة لاحتساب المخاطر، لا يعرفون كيفية احتساب كل هذه القيم، فعلى الرقم أن يكون بالدولار، وإذا ابتسم أحدهم هذا يعني أنت فرح، ولكن نحن نسأل الكيلوغرامات، الأرقام، فعلينا أن نتذكر الربح، الخسارة، المخاطر. فكل هذه الأرقام تتغير لأن الشركات فعلا لا تعرف كيفية تقييم وتقدير هذه الأرقام، وهذا ما نراه في كل حالة عندما نعنى بمسؤولية اجتماعية للشركات. نحن نتكلم هنا عن المخاطر المناخية فقط لأنه الموضوع الرائج حاليا، ولكن فلنتكلم عن أمور إضافية. هل تؤمن المصارف بذلك؟ إذا ما نظرنا إلى الأرقام العالمية، أقول لكم أن هذه الأرقام من منطقة المينا ليست متوفرة. لا يمكنني أن أدعم ما أقوله من خلال الأرقام، ولكنني أنا أمثل 400 عضو في جمعية المصارف، فأقول أن آراءهم مختلفة عن كيفية نظرتنا لهذه المواضيع. نحن في هذه الغرفة، فعلينا أن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار كيفية تخفيف المخاطر. فتخفيف المخاطر لا يشجع المستثمرين أو لا يجذب المستثمرين، ولكن يعيد جذبهم لأنهم كانوا هنا. كيف يحصل ذلك؟ إذا ما نظرنا إلى كل الإحصاءات التي تصدر، هذه الإحصاءات هي إحصاءات سلبية. هل قام أحدهم بدراسة حول الربح المتأتي عن التغير المناخي؟ هذا الرجل هو مصرفي مشهور وهو رئيس المصرف الفيدرالي في إنجلترا. وهل تعرفون ما يقوله؟ يقول إن التغير المناخي هو تراجيديا الأفق. لا أعرف إذا ما كان الأشخاص يتحمسون كثيرا لهذه المصائب. نقول أولا المخاطر المادية، المخاطر القانونية، بالإضافة إلى المخاطر الانتقالية. فيقول المصرفيون خبئوا أموالكم. كيف يمكننا أن نحمي بالقانون هذه المصارف في منطقة المينا؟ تذكروا، كلما تواجدت كرئيس أو مسؤول في القطاع المصرفي أنا أفكر بهذه النقاط، فاستفيدوا مما أقوله وفعلا استخدموا هذه النقاط في نقاشاتكم. مثلا معظم الدول تنتقي التأمين بطريقة انتقائية. هل قام أحدهم بدراسة للتوصل إلى إحصائيات من كيفية استفادة أو مدى استفادة شركات التأمين من عملهم؟ هنا مثلا هذه الإحصاءات تظهر لكم الشركات المتوفرة، ولكن انظروا إلى أماكن أخرى في العالم، نرى أن هنالك فرص مالية متعددة. هنا فقط نتكلم عن الأمور المالية. ثانيا، في البحث الثاني تم طرح سؤال على المصارف: هل تنظرون إلى هذه المخاطر بأنها فرصة؟ فالمصارف دائما تفعل ذلك، ينظرون إلى الربح، الخسارة والمخاطر، فيؤمنون بأن هنالك مصلحة في كل الحالات، ولكن يجب أن يستفيدوا منها بطريقة جيدة. فالمصارف يعرفون أن الخدمات هنا أساسية، ولكنهم لا يعرفون أي خدمات هي الضرورية. فكلما حصل نقاش بين الأطراف المتعددة نتكلم عن التخوفات والمخاوف ولا الفرص. سأتكلم عن بعض المصارف التي غيرت نمطها: كريديسي، HSBC، جولدن، ستاندرد شارترد. كل هذه المصارف بدأت بعملية التخطيط وابتعدوا عن عملية تخفيف المخاطر. بالنسبة لإحصاءات الإمكانيات الشرائية، هل من إحصاءات صدرت تعلمنا بعدد الأشخاص الذين هم فعلا يريدون شراء هذه المنتجات غير ضارة بالبيئة؟ لسوء الحظ لا أريد أن أتكلم بطريقة فوقية، ولكن أنا أقول أنه علينا أن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار الربح. ولكن ماذا نعني بذلك؟ المؤسسات المالية هي في صلب هذه العملية، في صلب العملية الاقتصادية. علينا أن لا ننسى أن المؤسسات المالية عليها أن تمتثل ببعض القوانين والقواعد، بالإضافة إلى مسائل أخرى تعنى بالتواصل مع العملاء. وعندما نتكلم عن المجموعات الأقل حظوة علينا دائما أن نتطرق إلى هذه المواضيع. وهنا سأقول أننا وقعنا مذكرة تفاهم مع شركة تعمل في مجال الابتكار والتكنولوجيا في المينا، في منطقة المينا، ولكنهم لم يأخذوا بعين الاعتبار هذا العامل المالي. فعندما نتكلم عن المجموعات الأقل حظوة إنهم في المصارف. فعندما نتكلم عن الإشراك المالي في الشرق الأوسط، علينا أن نتأكد من أن المؤسسات الصغيرة والمتوسطة الحجم موجودة في هذا النطاق وفي هذا القطاع. عندما تتعامل هذه المؤسسات أو عندما تقوم بعملياتها المالية، ماذا تفعل؟ هذا ما نوصي به. أولا، علينا أن نحظى ببيانات خاصة عن الأسواق بالإضافة إلى بيانات خاصة بالمخاطر. على المنظمات غير الحكومية هي أن تصدر هذه البيانات، لأننا لن نحصل عليها من المصارف. ولكن في الوقت نفسه علينا أن نتأكد من أننا ننظر إلى تخفيف المخاطر والربح. ثانيا، ما يسمى بالمنظمين. هؤلاء المنظمون يقدمون، أو الجهات التنظيمية هي التي تقدم هذه التحفيزات. عليكم أن تقوموا أن تعقدوا هذه الشراكات معهم. وأخيرا، عندما نتكلم عن المؤسسات المالية، ما هي التنظيمات الأساسية؟ وهذا ما علينا أن نمتثل به. مثلا مصرف لبنان قدم بعض التحفيزات، وهذا ما علينا أن نعتمد عليه. وأخيرا وليس آخرا، الجميع ينسى ما يسمى بالمعرفة المالية. فعلى العميل أن يعرف أنه عندما يريد إخراج ماله أو استخراج ماله من المصرف، عليه أن يستفيد بطريقة معينة، وعلى المصرف أن يستفيد أيضا. وأخيرا وليس آخرا، فمن دون المصارف إذا ما افتقرنا إلى مصارف قوية لن ينجذب المستثمرون إلى الأسواق. شكرا.
Okay, thank you, Antoine. Thank you, sir.
I'm mitigating the risk of falling. Okay. صباح الخير.
Good morning. Speaking of corruption, might depict a dramatic panorama of the Arab region. We live within a region that has a great level of corruption prevailing in it. Previously, we would have never heard of a corruption or combating corruption in the rhetoric. And there is an optimism that this rhetoric is increasing and more awareness is given to combating corruption, which is an integral part of the reform of the inner organization of any state. Despite the fact that the Arab countries in their formal speeches declare that there is a clear political will to fight corruption, however, we see that things worsen on a yearly basis in the Arab countries. As regards the corruption indicator in 2017, 95% of the Arab countries have even become more corrupt or remain at a standstill with high levels of corruption. All 95% of Arab countries ranked 95% or less when it comes to fighting corruption. In general, the regression of freedom and the participation of the civil society and the mass media was not only in the Arab world, but at an international scale. To date, 90% of countries that declined were because of the regression of the participation of the mass media and civil society and the freedom of speech. The corruption index is an index prepared by all experts in combating corruption in all countries. We see that the International Corruption Index, through which the public opinion voice is taken into account, we see that 61% of persons believe that corruption has increased. We see in the Arab countries that were under study to what extent the citizen had trust in the capacity of its regime to combat corruption, and what is the genuine will to do so. During the last 3 days, we have listened to beautiful presentations on plans for sustainable development. Since we know that combating corruption cannot happen overnight, yet because of the worsening condition and deterioration of governments, the efforts to combat corruption remain very difficult. Where are the shortcomings? All countries are speaking of plans, of strategies, but where are the shortcomings? What is the hurdle that we need to circumvent in order to achieve this sustainable development that we all aspire to? Speaking of corruption, and the establishment of an integrated national organization does not require superficial measures, i.e. fighting corrupt people and imprisoning them. And we do not only speak of laws to have freedom of access to information and more civilized laws here than there. Speaking of combating corruption is a rhetoric of an integrated, unified organization. And we believe that Transparency International, that SDG 16 is a cross-cutting objective amongst all SDGs. And if it is not achieved in all its items, sustainable development will never see the light. We speak of the law reigning supreme. We speak of illicit money influxes. We speak of corruption and briberies. We speak of shortcomings within the prevailing institutions. We speak of the lack of participatory approaches in reality, and we speak of the failing accountability and the incapacity to have access to information and data. During the last 2 weeks, I have tried to have information, even from international organizations, on the status of the Arab region. Even within our statistics and the international statistics, the Arab region requires data and requires clear, genuine statistics in order to induce sustainable change towards sustainable development. 1 out of 3 persons in the Arab region have paid briberies to receive basic services such as health, water resources, education, i.e. 50 million persons paying briberies in order to have their basic rights. The main services for which citizens pay briberies, we start with courts, Justice Department, police, security department, to have documents and permits. So we speak of having preferential rights and advantages. We speak of hospitals and clinics, vital rights in terms of energy and water resources. We speak of education. These are the basic rights. And these are the basic rights that attract briberies. How can we even think of sustainable development? 5 out of the 9 countries that were under scrutiny, briberies paid by the poorest was multiplied 3-fold in comparison to the rich. And development targets the poor. The residents of the rural areas are mostly affected. More than 1/3 of these areas pay more briberies in comparison to urban areas. I shall speak of some of the most important challenges in a nutshell and delve into the details of 2 important challenges. But we see that there is a great challenge in identifying priorities with the genuine participation of the civil society that might be able to reach out to the rural areas as well as the local communities that know what are the needs. There should be a real participatory approach with the civil society and local communities as well as the private sector. There should be also a good monitoring and a good identification of the budget. The lack of control, accountability, and the lack of public freedom is a radical impairment towards sustainable development. We also have a weakness in the judicial system when it comes to public tenders and purchases. Even if there are procedures for conviction, there might be a specific obstacle before even reaching courts. We also have these political sensitivities and mediations that happen. What about beneficial ownership? We have some companies whose owners are unidentified. What about tax evasion? What about the weakness of the tax collection systems? When it comes to the transparency of budgets, we have the Index of Public Integrity in the Arab countries. Within the transparency of budgets, there must be access to rich information and to use international criteria in budgets, such as the classification of budget items, the use of electronic pages in order to monitor the disbursement of the general budget and the budget of municipalities, and the active participation of CSOs. This is what we can say, at least in terms of overseeing the spending of funding dedicated to sustainable development. What about the stolen funds? Even if we know what is the amount of these stolen funds, even in countries that went through the Arab Spring, we do not have effective figures, but every country has given its own figures in this regard and restored some millions out of billions of stolen dollars. Yet, despite the fact that 6 years have elapsed, restoration of these funds face many challenges, shortcomings in the judicial system, and the capacity of the latter to deal with this issue. At some times, some political influence might be exerted, the mechanisms of verification that are weak, the mechanisms of cooperation between countries, the mechanisms of restoring these stolen funds, and how they should be better broken down into sectors for sustainable development. The last slide is about the illicit financial influxes. World Bank believes that $2.3 trillion are stolen because of corruption and fly out of bank accounts locally into international bank accounts. The volume of illicit money influxes from the Arab region and from Pakistan and Afghanistan during 2004 and 2013 was $560 billion. Iraq ranked first in the Arab region and the 16th rank internationally when it comes to illicit money influxes, according to the same organization, i.e. the World Bank. Tomorrow we will know the reality, hopefully, and we hope that good governance will be a basis for good sustainable development. Thank you.
أخذت منها 6 دقائق زيادة.
You have taken 6 additional minutes. What do we call that? No one has complained, says the speaker. Ms. Isabel, the floor is yours. Good morning. I'm studying the Arabic language, but my Arabic language is still weak, so I'll be speaking in English. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
UNDP UNEP Poverty Environment Initiative, and yesterday my colleague from Mauritania presented the case of Mauritania. And today I wanted to share with you a very concrete example on a government. This is the case of Laos in Asia, requesting the program advice and technical assistance on how to implement environmental and social safeguards with regard to foreign direct investment that had in the past very negative effects on the poor and on the environment. So I want to share with you a video which explains the process, and then we can have a discussion afterwards.
Yeah,
thanks.
investments can come with some serious repercussions. Lao PDR faces various environmental challenges. These include climate change, damage to ecosystems through the damage of waterways, clearing of forests, grasslands and wetlands, pollution of aquatic and terrestrial systems, loss of biodiversity, and soil erosion. The environmental impacts of investments exacerbate all of these challenges. On the social side, while poverty is decreasing, inequalities are growing. Many project developers have not effectively involved local communities. This means that potential benefits do not always trickle down to those who are directly impacted by the investment. With more investments predicted, the big question is how do we ensure that investments contribute to the larger vision of Lao PDR's socio-economic plan and commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 2009, the UNDP-UNEP Poverty Environment Initiative has been working closely with the government of Lao to improve planning and to promote, manage and regulate quality investment. What is a quality investment? A quality investment is one that helps reduce poverty, diversifies the economy, ensures that a fair distribution of benefits reaches the population, and has the least negative impact on the environment. In 2009, when PEI set off on its journey, the situation was rather different from what it is today. Many challenges existed, such as weak investment contracts, no guidelines to undertake environmental assessments, no formal process for public involvement, limited ability to undertake financial assessments, no data management systems, and insufficient data sharing between ministries. Needless to say, the government required the tools and capacities to effectively regulate investments. With PEI's ongoing support, resources are sustainably managed for all members of society. Lao PDR has come a long way in identifying the vast potential and the pitfalls of development which is driven by natural resources. The Poverty Environment Initiative solutions have laid a strong foundation. What we need now is forward-looking action through high-level political commitment and the support of the international community to continue PEI's journey in Lao PDR.
طيب شكرا. نحن
Thank you. The four presentations that were just offered are complementary, starting with Mr. Anas, who spoke of the main criteria upon which a partnership must be built, a mutual accountability, as well as diversification of production. Mr. Antoine has delved in the role of banks in harnessing the trust of local investors. Kinda has broached the topic of corruption and governance in general, as well as the cost of corruption on economy, production, and developmental efforts. And we ended with a case study on a success story that UNDP and UN Environment believe that they achieved in Laos, in Asia. We have half an hour through which we can have a first round of questions and comments. I don't know how many rounds we can have according to the time that we still have. First, we start with five short comments. We can see many hands are raised. So we start with a first comment or question. To the left side. Thank you, Ziad. My name is Wafa Abul Hassan, head of the Department of Statistics at ESQA. I have a small comment and a recommendation. Economic statistics are published on ESQA's website on the National Accounts, Trade, Industry and Environment. We hope that you will surf this website and look for data. Secondly, as for the financial sector, what is the partnership that the financial sector is playing with the National Statistics Bureau within countries? Is it financing any of the countries' surveys? The National Statistics Bureaus are broke without any budget. Is the financial sector or with the private sector having any partnership with these bureaus? Secondly, what about the role of the banking sector when we hold our meetings on economic statistics and national accounts? One of the constraints that we have to face is that the banks do not deal with these national statistics bureaus. So as you ask from us recommendations, we ask you also to provide us with your recommendations, and please take that into account. Thank you very much for your valuable presentations. I have a comment and a recommendation on the presentation of Mr. Antoine that I deem very important on the role of the banking sector in financing projects in the framework of sustainable development. I believe that there are three facets of this financing process. Finance goes into the ecosystem of incentives done by the state, and the banking sector plays an instrumental role at this level in order to develop some sectors, as was the case in Tunisia with Kham Shamsi, that moved from 6,000 square meters per year to 60,000 square meters per year thanks to the intervention of the banking sector. Secondly, you have talked about CSR, corporate social responsibility, which harnesses the environmental sense within banks, and I believe this is of utmost importance. Thirdly, I have a recommendation to ESQA. To date, the banking sector does not know what projects are done within the framework of sustainable development. The energy efficiency sector is the one that attracts mostly investments, and sometimes banks do not even know which projects are energy efficient, so there should be a more familiarization, more dissemination of these projects. Therefore, ESCWA must support and incentivize banks so they will get into the investment of these projects, because this will be an accelerator for sustainable development. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Ahmed Kamagi, Ministry of Planning and American University of Cairo. Thank you all for your valuable presentations. My comment is also cross-cutting with the previous session. I would have hoped to showcase the status of the Arab region in terms of funding or financing for sustainable development purposes. We did not see any evaluation for the status of Arab countries in this regard. To implement Addis Ababa Action Plan, to which the Arab countries are signatories, there should be a funding for the sustainable development process. However, there is no depiction or description of the situation currently existing in the Arab countries. The same goes for the previous session. There was a rhetoric on sustainable cities, but the only facets that were dealt with were education and health and environment, though they are important, but we still haven't delved into the core of the main topic. Financing for sustainable development should have efforts for investments and mostly to attract qualitative investments in the infrastructure in the long run. Do we have any vision, any data, any indicators in this regard? Finally, I would like to draw your attention to the issue of CSR, or corporate social responsibility. I believe that the sustainable development should not only be incumbent on CSR. Sustainable development should be an opportunity for more profitability for the private sector and for the banking sector mostly. We need to have more studies and data in this regard. I believe there is a huge gap. Therefore, ESCWA should undertake objective studies in order to highlight the gaps in our understanding and our vision vis-à-vis these important topics. Atidal from the civil society. Thank you, Ziad. I would like to thank all the panelists. As regards Ms. Kinda's presentation, I agreed all of the efforts of Transparency International, but we felt as if the corruption was an individual act, but it should be an act at the level of the state, not only by judges or media specialists or individuals. The countries are crippled with a whole system of corruption. Secondly, the freedom of speech, as you said, is important, but in a democratic country, at least in the Arab countries that we are well aware of, this equation might not be the sound one, i.e. every time we have higher indexes of democracy, and we have a great exercise of democracy and freedom of speech, corruption levels decline. In Tunisia, there was a political will to fight corruption, yet it was declared as a savage war against corruption. So there was a political will to have institutions to find corruption, to have an investigative survey, but the contrived objectives were not reached because the barons of corruption are much stronger than any strategy that can be opted for by any state. Thank you, Mr. Chair and dear panelists. I would like to comment on the presentation of Ms. Kinda. But I would like to ask one question firstly. What are the criteria used to measure corruption on all levels, whether at a state level or at an international scale, in all its components? Now, my comment is as follows. Do you not agree with me that the international political system, as well as the regional political system and the banking sector, are participating to protecting corruption? They are safeguarding illicit funds. So they are protecting these deposits and using them for their best interests, and even to fight the populations whose funds were stolen. So my question, what are the procedures that Transparency International are taking in the absence of this international and regional political protection in order to identify the volume of corruption in all of these systems? Thank you.
طبيعي. شكرا.
Maimouna from the Ministry of Economy and Finance in Mauritania. Thank you for raising this important issue, financing sustainable development. We can't speak of sustainable development without speaking of financing schemes. At governments, we have the problematic issue of reducing public indebtedness and moving towards the implementation of Agenda 2030. Question to the gentleman from the Union of Arab Banks. Do you have initiatives to encourage Arab banks, especially those that contribute to financing sustainable development projects, like the banks that finance solar system plants and renewable energy plants? And can you share with us those initiatives in such a platform? Can you speak to us more about those schemes and initiatives? Thank you, Mr. Ziad. Honestly, amazing and brilliant presentations. Thank you all. The financial gap refers to huge numbers. 2.5 trillion. The overall contributions of donor countries is $143 billion, less than 5% of what development needs. So we need to look into other financing mechanisms. Private sector, Mr. Antoine spoke about the conducive environment, the attractive environment, and the enforceability of the rule of law. However, we need to be innovative with a new means to mobilize funds, crowdfunding, zakat funds for SDGs, endowments, and waqf. There is a number of financing mechanisms that were not used yet in the Arab world. There's also sovereignty funds instead, and with all due respect to all rich countries and advanced countries, instead of investing in real estates in London, Paris, New York, is there any such way that we can provide mechanisms whereby sovereignty funds can contribute to development in the Arab the Arab development sovereign funds? Also, the Islamic banks' contributions and donors and grants, they aim at sharing wealth with the poor. And I stop here at this. We keep focusing on financing, and it's like we have this inferiority perspective towards the poor. We need to shift. We need to change our perspective. We need to empower people. We're not helping people out of charity. We want to help the poor to build their capacities, open the horizons for the enterprises to build the capacities of all in that perspective. Dr. Abdel Salam.
شكرا جزيلا أستاذ إياد والمتحدثين. أنا حقيقة عندي نقطة.
Two main issues I would like to raise. First, the human rights-based approach, which should be a main pillar in this discussion. Dr. Anas has referred to this issue, I believe. Also, Mrs. Kinda hinted at it. But we need to listen more to this. There are issues, important issues, related to accountability, transparency, participation in the issue of financing, and another issue related to priorities. Financing, giving the financing for development issues the human rights aspect or human rights face. So, in this regard, I really hope to listen more to you speaking and addressing this. Mr. Antoine from the Union of Arab Banks, he spoke about social corporate responsibility. I think we are past that. In the Agenda 2030, we speak about business and human rights. Social responsibility is not allowing us much maneuver to do as much as we are expected to do. So that takes us to the private sector. The private sector has to be an active and real partner to the implementation of Agenda 2030. Less than 10 minutes before we wrap up this session, and I need to give the floor to my 4 panelists. Would it be possible to extend this session a little bit more? Let's listen to the panelists, to the answers to the panelists, and then we take another round of questions if the session is extended. So, do we listen to the answers of our panelists? I kindly urge you to be brief and concise with your answers. What is available now in terms of data on financing? I think this data is not available in the Arab region. There is scarcity of information and data. Even the reports, the voluntary reports, is not addressing the financing aspect properly and adequately. That's one. Second, the figures and numbers. Who puts them? International financing corporations. So international financing corporations spoke about the trillions, the billions and the trillions. So far, we don't have the more realistic approach to getting those more accurate figures.
social responsibility فيما يتعلق
Talking about the corporate social responsibility, it is now it is being addressed now as one of the ways to ensure the commitment and obligation of the private sector, and it falls under the global compact that is the UN voluntary framework. All Arab countries, out of all the Arab countries, we don't have more than 100 maybe being part of this framework. So it is really modest as a number. This is why I referred more to the mutual responsibility and everyone's responsibility when it comes to choices. It's not only the concern of the private sector.
A certain thing.
من باب التوضيح، ما أردت أن أتكلم عنه هو المعلومات الناجمة من البيانات، ولا أقول إن البيانات غائبة. ليس هناك من بيانات كافية لكي نضع حافظة الاستثمارات. كم هي الأموال الموجودة خارج القطاع المالي التي تسمح لنا بوضع البيانات والمعلومات؟ أعلم بمجموعة من التقارير التي وضعت بالاستناد إلى معرفتي بالأبحاث التي وضعت خلال السنوات الماضية. لا أستطيع أن أحدد تقريرا واحدا يعطينا إمكانية لجمع كل تلك المعطيات ضمن تقرير واضح. لدينا بيانات متفرقة ومستقلة وغير موحدة. خذوا على سبيل المثال لندن، يتطرقون إلى المناطق الريفية الفقيرة ويعطونكم الخيارات المختلفة حول كيفية دعم تلك المناطق، وهذا يساعدني كمستثمر أن أعرف الواقع القائم قبل أن آتي للاستثمار. إذن البيانات المتوفرة للمستثمرين للمؤسسات المالية غائبة أو قليلة. كذلك إذا ما بحثتم عبر جوجل الربحية في القطاعات الأفقر، كم من النتائج ستأتي من وكالات الأمم المتحدة وكم منها سيأتي من بلدان محددة فيها تلك الشرائح. منطقة الشرق الأوسط لا تستحوذ على أكثر من 13% من نسبة تلك النتائج. ثانيا، المسؤولية الاجتماعية للشركات. أعتقد أنكم أسأتم فهمي. علينا أن نتحول إلى مسألة الربحية. المسؤولية الاجتماعية للشركات هي جهد نبذله من أجل تعزيز أو تحسين شعورنا حيال أنفسنا، وليس هذا هو القصد. يجب أن ندر الأرباح. التنمية المستدامة في نهاية المطاف تتصل بالاقتصاد والربحية مقارنة بالحد من المخاطر. عندما نأخذ هذا المنحى ستكون المقاربة مختلفة، لأن المستثمرين، وإذا ما سألتكم فردا هنا أن تعطوني مالا لشركة في منطقة الريفية، سوف تعطوني ليس أكثر من $5 أو $100 كحد كسيناريو أفضل. ولكن إذا ما أعطيتكم قراءة عن العائد على الأرباح في إطار مختلف من الأعمال، ستكون المقاربة المختلفة. التنمية المستدامة تندرج ضمن القطاع الخاص وليس ضمن مبادرات المسؤولية الاجتماعية للشركات. In the last 3 years, I got accustomed to be part of the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development, and we had seen more talks about governance and good governance in the last 3 years. And now I'm convinced that there should be a specific recommendation by the ASQA that in the upcoming forums, there should be one clear headline on governance and corruption and sustainable development. There is a number of issues that we cannot address in a simple 5 minutes, especially when we talk about the standards and criteria that are used by organizations or about international indicators to measure and gauge corruption. They are different and they pertain to public freedoms, economy, finance. The criteria and standards are different and so varied, and we should adopt a very clear discourse in this field. I agree with I'tidal. I didn't have much time to tackle this. Yes, I tackled corruption and financing and the fate of funds. It is an integrated system. If you have one deficiency, one flaw in the good governance system within good enterprises and within good civil society, we cannot speak about full realization of development. I agree with everything you said, madam. شكرا للزميل الذي ذكرنا بالمقاربة القائمة على الحقوق، وأعطيكم مثالا. نتكلم عن إعادة تخصيص الموارد أو عفوا الموارد المالية. لربما علينا أن نفكر في الإصلاحات المالية والضريبية التي تعالج مسألة توزيع الموارد المالية. ربما يمكننا أن نعيد تسمية الأمور. قطاع الصحة هو من الأمثلة الأساسية. نحن نتكلم عن قطاع صحة مثمر إلى المشاريع الصحية المثمرة تذهب الأموال، وهذا لا يؤدي بالتالي إلى مساعدة الفقراء. نتكلم عن أساليب التخفيف من المخاطر من خلال إشراك منظمات المجتمع المدني وقطاع المصارف، ولكن السؤال الذي علينا أن نطرحه هو: هل هذه الخطط والبرامج والأساليب تصل إلى الفقراء في الأطراف؟
بس ممكن أطلب، بدي أحاول أعطي الكل، بس ممكن أطلب
question, or I will take another round of questions, but please stick to very targeted and quick questions. Let's start with Syria. For some pure Lebanese reasons. Thank you. Development is a thorny issue, so to speak, but a few points. Fighting corruption, we can't speak about fighting corruption per se. We can talk about efforts and attempts. You mentioned examples in the judicial system. The problem might not be in the system, it might be in one individual. Financing development. In the 90s, I read an article about the loss of development or the lost development. It is dangerous, and this is something we've been talking about since the 70s thus far. Have we adopted better approaches? Did we invest our monies in development, or did we go elsewhere? Participation, the participation approach. As if I know that I understood from the speaker that the sustainable development is the responsibility of the banking sector and the private sector. I disagree with you. It's the responsibility of everyone, starting with the citizens. Financing is contingent upon the conditions of the donor. The donors would come with their set of conditions, and you would sometimes feel yourself unable to meet them. A donor country or a donor entity should be should develop the capacities of the helped or the assisted country to be able to sustain its development on its own. Otherwise, we wouldn't be speaking about useful development. Thank you. The Arab countries that have seen conflicts have in parallel seen an interruption of development projects. In Libya, the development program that was launched in 2008 was put at halt. It was a large-scale program that aimed at developing, fully developing the infrastructure, creating new networks, grids, new universities, new medical and health facilities. It was a huge program, but it stopped. Now, under the current circumstances, now as we see scarce resources, the increasing scarcity of resources, we have seen that we are now trying to find financing schemes or channels from outside our budgets. Now, we have a program for opening the foreign direct investment possibilities and finding cooperation schemes with banks. So many other projects came to substitute that program, but those projects are being concluded with multinational companies, and there is a number of aspects that we need to address and bear in mind before starting implementation. Those projects, or one of the aspects that should be addressed, is contracting, technical issues, legal issues. These issues should be considered before venturing into the investment project. Accordingly, I ask, could ESCWA help such countries, inclusive of Libya, in resolving these issues? Lebanon, then Palestine. Bassam Jouni from the Ministry of Industry in Lebanon, Department of Planning. During the last 2 days, we didn't address the issue of transforming from the informal economy to the formal economy. This is the solid grounds. This is the solid pillar for implementing sustainable development goals. You know that the scale of the informal economy in Lebanon is around 30%. Imagine the advantages lying in this 30% to expand our economy. Before talking about fighting corruption, you have a shadow economy operating with this scale, 30% in Lebanon. If you could turn this economy into a formal economy, think of the financial inclusion you could do. Think of the increased job opportunities created. So I really hope to see a strategy being put down to transform informal economies into formal economies. Thank you, Ziad. 2 questions and 1 observation. 1 question to Mrs. Kinda. We need to be fair. And we need to talk about some success stories. Is the Arab country void of any success stories? There no true work, no true attempts. We know that we are not up to the expected level, but there are success stories. What are those success stories? That's one. Second, another question to Mr. Anthony on the Arab banks. Why do we see that the Arab banks so far so reluctant to finance friendly projects and businesses? It is a question that needs to be answered. The Arab banks should focus on this type of financing. If we talk about sustainable development, the financing schemes should be also taking into consideration sustainability. Another point, we need to emphasize the international responsibility in terms of financing and funding sustainable development, especially those advanced countries that have started its own development ventures and industrial ventures over the last decades. And now we are bearing the brunt of the impacts. Climate change, desertification, deforestation impacted and undermined biodiversity. So the world powers need to bear and shoulder their responsibilities in this field. Thank you.
ايوه اوكي شكرا جزيلا لجميع المتحدثين.
Let me thank all the panelists. The banking sector has put the NGOs at the top of the pyramid. My question, are Arab NGOs capable? Do they have the capacities needed to shoulder this role? Or funding countries, should they put conditions on the countries they donate to build the capacities of NGOs, or play somewhat of a supervisory role or follow-up role? Thank you. Thank you, Ziad. A point on financing for development. Yes, financing is very important, but more important than that is managing financing and directing it towards sustainable development, whereby we see an economic return to the citizens. Let me speak about the Jordanian experience. We actually set up a unit within the Ministry of Planning to manage and guide public investments, train a local team, a local task force. We wanted to see those financing schemes or those funds going to businesses with an added value and having a high economic and social added value. Another point on the partnership with the private sector. In the coming years, this partnership will become of utmost importance because the private sector is a main and actual partner in development, and we need to provide a conducive environment for investment for the for the private sector, excuse me. We need to build this trust between the public and the private sectors so that they can partner on good terms and on right terms so that the citizens would reap the benefits. Oman, Iraq, and then the civil society. Iraq. Najla from Iraq. Unfortunately, corruption is widespread in Iraq, and you have you have given the percentage earlier. And corruption has become an institutional structure in Iraq. I believe that the problem is in the reduced capacities of digital institutions, or excuse me, the reduced capacities of control and supervisory authorities. We don't see them doing their role being actively implemented in holding financial institutions to account. Also, the multifactional landscape. The fact that we have so many partners, so many parties, excuse me, this has kept from holding some politicians to account. You see that this is one of the main challenges we face in Iraq, to hold people and politicians to account. And the moderator is saying it's the coalition of parties, not the plurality of parties. On the issue of corruption, the methodologies used and the methods used to collect and collate data related to corruption. Do you gather this data through governmental institutions? Does the civil society play a role at this stage? Do you disseminate questionnaires to the governmental institutions and the private sector? And are these questionnaires neutral? unbiased. Another point, on the GCC countries, you know that the incomers, the foreigners constitute the largest share of the population. Can we gauge the role and the role and the contribution of the incomers, the foreigners, in the corruption in the country? Last but not least.
شكرا جزيلا. أرد على مندوب فلسطين.
I would like to answer Palestine. Undoubtedly, major strides and efforts are being deployed by countries, especially we've seen these in the recent countries. We have seen corruption index being created. We have seen laws on combating corruption, laws on accessing information. This is the cup half full. This is what governments look at. This is what governments focus on. But you have asked the floor before the gentleman got the chance to answer. But this is the entry point. When you start by giving us figures and numbers, all of these showcase regression and a descending curve, more plummeting, more increased percentages of corruption. We've been hearing about interventions and strategies and programs for the last 2 years. Yes, there are differences between the different countries, but it's evident that all of those efforts are just mere talk. We don't see tangible results on the ground. The self-evident question is, what is the problem? What is the true problem? Kinda tried to be polite in describing the situation. We see efforts being deployed but the results are backlashing. We see reversed impacts. In short, it is time now that governments recognize that if they do not fight corruption ferociously, show the people that they are doing so, and convince people that they are doing it. Can you go to the question? Straight to the question, sir. I think governments will be faced in a very difficult situation. States and countries cannot be allies to the corruption and at the same time convince people that they are fighting. They need to choose. Thank you, sir.
Very quickly. Anas, do you have something to say regarding this topic? Just like Kinda said earlier on, development in the Arab region necessitates meetings and agreements on all of this. Antoine? عندما وضعت المنظمات غير الحكومية في أعلى الهرم لم أفعل ذلك عن
any entity that has the power and the financing to create data that's specific. Certain banks actually fund, to respond also, fund specific sector investments because they believe that this sector is the next boom. Okay? To respond to the question of the importance of the financial sector. Please don't get me wrong. What I'm trying to say is really the story of don't give him a fish, teach him how to fish. Okay? If you want somebody to be taught how to fish, every single study has shown that if you don't have a bank account, you are considered at a certain point without assets. A financial account is directly linked to financial stability. It teaches you how to save, how to get a loan, how to be financially comfortable. This was the issue. I'm not saying we're that important. I'm saying in the end, your poverty, they need to be banked to be able to sustain.
Okay, your point is very clear. Thank you, George. I'm sorry for being tough.
سريعا قصص النجاحات مجتزأة
stories
غير
are partial,
متكاملة.
incomplete. They are published and formulated in one law. Later on, we will have another law a year later contradicting the previous laws. For example, we have in Tunisia a law of the right to access information in 2016, and then later on there was another law that has to do with conciliation that negatively impacted the whole matter of corruption that was tackled in earlier laws. So we do have success stories, but they are partial. Now, the fighting corruption approach needs to be integrated and comprehensive. We can talk about the CSOs in Palestine holding accountable a minister regarding a breach in the drawing up of the budget, and there is information about that. However, in most countries, for example, a certain ministry with a budget of 1 million dinars or whatever, 1 million local currency, getting 700,000, where are the remaining 300,000? The remaining 300,000 can be monitored by the other CSOs, NGOs, other entities to monitored by them to hold accountable this ministry or this minister. So we have an overall system that we need to consider. And the criteria, as I've already said earlier on, in detail, the criteria need to be detailed. We cannot talk about that very quickly. And there is the indicator of measuring corruption in the public sector, meaning in public utilities. And there is also the index of international corruption or international index for corruption. Thank you. Thank you, Kinda. I will conclude, but with two remarks, two comments. First, we need to take into consideration something very important. Sustainable development at the national level is the responsibility of the state, first and foremost, in regards to planning and formulating national strategies, and then there in the coordination of the implementation process and in the harmony between or amongst the different partners, so CSOs, NGOs, private sector, and other stakeholders in this regard. Now, as for the private sector, I think that once the private sector becomes a partner in development, it will benefit from certain exemptions, incentives, facilitations. Then consequently, the private sector has to also be held accountable for human rights criteria as well as accountability. So all this necessitates high levels of transparency and mutual accountability. Last point, what Kinda was saying, corruption is a structural case, a structural situation. It's an international phenomenon. It is the nature of the system that generates the intertwining of the political decision with the financial one, which generates in itself a sort of corruption. And this is what the World Bank described. And in 2015, the World Bank said that the cost of this pattern of economy is 9% of the GDP. Consequently, we are talking about something that is methodical and not just exceptional cases here and there. So that is why I think we need a very brave decision to launch a war against corruption with structural reform that will take into consideration the mobilization of the different capacities in order to orient ourselves in the developmental process. We have a 15-minute delay, but we had to do that. Thank you. Now we have lunch, I think.
شكرا.
Thank you. The lunch break is until 2. After that, we continue with our 7th session, looking at